Kia ora, my name is Craig Murray, and this is episode number 14 of the Smeet and E Festival podcast. Today we have Stu Hartley on the show, and we are going to be focusing on insurance, specifically event-based insurance. So Stu heads up a company called EventCover, and we're going to be talking about all things event-related and insurance. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Stu to the stream. Kia ora, how you go, man?
Good, man. How are you?
I am very well, coming from the not so sunny Rotorua today. Everything on this podcast is going to be about event-based insurance, what to look out for, and you're obviously the expert in that space, and we're going to be asking you a whole bunch of questions. But before we go into that, I would like to ask you what your first ever job was. So, I mean, your first ever job, not career, whether you're 7 or 8 or 10, pocket money, whatever it is. And then if you could just roll into a bit of your professional career, where you started, what you did, and then where you are now.
So, first job. Well, I'm from Manchester, back in the UK, and I believe my first job was around about 16, 17. I was in college, and I think it was stacking shelves in like a kind of like a supermarket type of setup in the local mall there. So that lasted me through college just to get a few pounds for some beers. Yeah, that was my intro into the working world, really. It was pretty cool, actually. Started work at 5 and finished at 8 in the evening. Pretty cruisy, and yeah, enjoyed it.
Cool. And then you went to varsity or university, and you moved into a career job. So what was your first ever career-based professional job? And then how did you get to where you are now?
So obviously I was at college training to be an actor, and focus on the media side as well. And I did a couple of years acting, which I loved, which was kind of my passion when I was younger. And then I went to university for 3 years, Manchester again, and swapped in front of the camera to behind the camera. So I've got an honours degree in television production. So I was behind the camera, focusing as a kind of a director, cameraman type of setup. And then I moved down to London, to the Big Smoke, to follow my dream, really. Started working in TV and film down there. Had a couple of years as a cameraman working at the Houses of Parliament, filming the proceedings there. And the company that I used to work for was like an outside broadcast type of company. They had the contracts for F1 Grand Prix, Premier League football, a lot of the sports, a lot of the music festivals.
The big ones.
Yeah. So I kind of cut my teeth in London, but then it kind of just became too expensive, really, for a kind of a youngster, early 20s, to try and make their way in London. So moved back up to Manchester with my girlfriend at the time and fell into insurance. Really, just needed a job to pay the mortgage. We just bought a house together, and wasn't really getting the breaks in TV. Really, really hard kind of industry to kind of forge your way into. A lot of backstabbing, which didn't really sit kind of well with myself. So fell into the wonderful, glorious insurance, and here I am today, which is kind of an amalgamation of arts, entertainment, and insurance. So that's how I ended up here.
So your first insurance job, was that in the event space, or was it a typical sort of insurance job for vehicles or housing, or what was it?
Yeah, it was kind of SME based. It was kind of new business. It was very much SME, and that was back in the UK. And I moved to New Zealand in 2011, and started working in the insurance industry in NZ just after the Christchurch earthquake. Didn't have any kind of desire to get back into insurance when I came to NZ. To be honest, I chose NZ because I really wanted to go back into the film industry, off the back of the huge industry that had been created in NZ. I really thought this was the place that I was going to come, and then Christchurch hit, and they were crying out for people with industry experience. So fell back into insurance really in NZ, and always had that passion to kind of bring my love. Insurance is dull as batshit. There's no getting around it. It's not the most glamorous industry in the world. And my passion was always kind of film, TV, arts, entertainment. So I kind of wanted to bring that together. And that's really how EventCover started. EventCover started 4 years ago, but prior to that, I was really focusing on that kind of event space. I've been working in the event space, focusing on the insurance side for about 10 years now. And really pulled, made the decision to kind of go alone about 4 years ago.
So can you give our audience a bit of an overview about EventCover, what it does, and how it could benefit any small business or any person really that is looking at managing or hosting an event?
Yeah, so I had the idea to set up EventCover, as I said, just coming up to 4 years. And there was a real desire in New Zealand at the time to have somebody on the ground in NZ who understood the industry, and understood the risks which go alongside, running an event. And prior to that, it was a kind of a misunderstood type of coverage. A large proportion of events in New Zealand probably were underinsured or were not insured at all. And even if they were insured, they probably had to go overseas to London. They had to struggle to try and find someone who understood what they were talking about, what the inherent risks were of an event. So we set up EventCover 4 years ago. Our entire focus is events, and we cover anything from your ma and pa market stall on a Saturday morning to large scale events such as the America's Cup, ASB Classic Tennis, multitude of festivals throughout the summer. And primarily we're ensuring the risk of that event being cancelled. And there's so many things that can go wrong, as you know, mate, with an event. It's very, very hard to kind of mitigate those losses unless you actually transfer that risk over to an insurer. And that's where we step in. We take on that risk if, for example, the event gets cancelled due to adverse weather, earthquake, something along those lines.
So could an event organizer come to you for public liability and that type of insurance, or are you only really focused on the risk of the event cancelling or something happening that was not planned?
Well, our main focus is just trying to understand the risks of the event. So the big ticket insurance is the cancellation, and that always will be. But most of the time, events will just come to us because they do need the public liability. They're having a small event in a town hall, and the local council requires them to carry public liability. And what we found was people don't really know where to go. How do they go and get a day's insurance? So we do really bespoke short-term cover, a couple of $100, purchase online, really, really quick and easy. And that's kind of our bread and butter type of business, because a lot of those SMEs and those small businesses that run maybe a couple of events per year don't necessarily have an annual insurance policy in place, or don't really know where to start. Then we can quite easily just cover them for a day's insurance if need be, if there's a requirement. But yeah, the big stuff is more the cancellation or the large scale prize insurance type risks, the $1 million giveaways, that type of stuff. They're the kind of big ticket items where we really get our hands dirty with, and allows us to work on those large scale stuff. But yeah, most of our businesses is the SME type businesses, that are running small local regional events.
So what type of event cover is there? If you could categorize it into, is there tickets, travel, artists, or talent? How does it work?
Really, the guts of it is covering what your loss would be. So that could be, you've spent $1 million on an event, or you've spent 10 grand on an event, and a loss of that nature, whether it's $1 million or 10 grand, can put a business out of business. So what we'll do is we'll either cover your costs of running that event, should that event get cancelled, and we'll effectively the claim is to give you back your irrecoverable losses, or for some of the large scale stuff, it's the net profit that you would have earned had that event not been cancelled. And again, that can move into the millions of dollars on the large scale events, and that mostly covers refund of tickets. You kind of want to be in a good position to be able to refund your ticket holders, but at the same time, you want to protect the money that's in the bank. And yeah, so there's many things that you can cover for an event. Non-appearance of your main artist, for example, the artist getting sick, earthquake cancellation. We saw off the back of in the South Island. Terrorism's a new one for us. We saw that off the back of Christchurch. Adverse weather's the big one. New Zealand goes through 4 seasons in one day, so it's really worrying sometimes that you could just have a deluge in the morning and you could lose your event due to it being washed out, and that could be millions of dollars down the pan. So it really pays to understand what the risk is of the event, or take a macro approach and just cover every eventuality, because you never really know what's going to happen with events.
I've got a proposed plan for an event in Rotorua where I'm based, and in my risk management assessment, one of the potential issues or risks is a geyser randomly shooting up in the middle of a field, because it could happen because of the location where the festival venue is. Like, well, what do we do if this happens? A geyser shoots up, or something starts, some sort of geothermal activity.
Yeah,
we know what we'll do as a team to cover it and make sure everyone's safe and well. But then if that impacts the event going ahead, or changing the event, or delaying the event, then we need to try and consider that. So there's, like you said, there's different types of risk for all different types of events and locations of where you are as well.
It is. I mean, the biggest, we don't often get, what's the main question you get asked, and that's obviously at the moment COVID. But aside from that, we get a lot of event producers, promoters who come to us with exactly what you've just said. We've got this really weird thing that could happen. We've got this kind of geyser that could go off, and we're like, cool. We'll look at the geothermal activity of the local area. We'll weigh up that risk. We've got some ridiculous amounts of data that we underwrite. Statistics and stuff like that. The most amazing weather data available on Earth is at our fingertips. So, there could be so many different things, forest fires for mountain biking events and so forth. The time of year is really key to how these events can run. Ash clouds, as I said, communicable disease and COVID is the main question at the moment. But every event is different, and you really need to, sit down and understand that type of event. And the only people that know that event more than anyone is the people running the events. So it really pays to invest ourselves in the industry. And I certainly don't regard myself as working in insurance anymore. I'm a supplier to the events industry, and that kind of breaks down those barriers a little bit when you actually understand the industry that you're supplying or providing a service to, because you're kind of breaking those boundaries in respect of being on the same page.
Could you give us a very sort of ballpark figure of what an event cover might cost for, let's say, okay, I run mountain bike races. Normally they have over 500 people in them. Let's say if I want to cover it for adverse weather conditions where the wind gets to 90 k's per hour, which means that we can no longer access the forest, what sort of cost would that be to cover that sort of risk?
It's a difficult question, because I knew you was going to ask it, mate. We underwrite purely based on statistical data. So we'll look at what is the probability of 90 kilometers an hour happening in that particular area, and we'll do that based on, as I said earlier, the most unbelievable weather data. So we'll take weather data from the nearest weather station, and we've got access to every single weather station in the world, and we'll look at historical 80 years worth of data, and that'll give us a probability of what's going to happen in the future. And then we'll also run advanced statistical data as well, whereby we'll look at similar years to this year, again based on historical data, and that'll give us a more of a snapshot of what we purely believe the weather data will be. and we'll look at, what the trigger for cancellation is. So you'll come to us and you'll say, hey, Stu, our event can proceed, rain or shine. However, if it starts getting up to, 75K, between 75K and 90, it just becomes really dangerous because we've got the tree fall issues and it's just, we'll be kicked out of the forest effectively. We'll kind of pinpoint it to that probability, which is a huge step from where we were previously. And it was just kind of, how much did we used to charge for mountain bike events? Where now we can look at it purely based on the weather data, which is, more often than not pretty solid, and we'll make a call based on that. So that purely drives the premium. So it's a really bespoke cover based on what you're doing. So it can be, it could be cheap as $600. But if it's a higher risk, obviously it's going to be higher. People are quite surprised how cheap it can be. The mindset is often, it's very expensive. It's just something we've never budgeted for, we've never had previously. But when you actually start to look at it, you then start to change the opinion of people in respect of, well, is it worth the risk, or can we just transfer that over to Stu, and Stu and EventCover takes the hit. More often than not, it's quite easy to persuade them.
It must scale based on how big the event is. So an event like, as an example, Rhythm and Vines they've just had to move into April 2022 from New Year's Eve, which is a massive huge decision. So with that, they would have a lot of ticket holders who would have already booked in their accommodation and all that sort of stuff, and then just like, I can't afford to go, I want to get rid of my ticket.
Yep.
Would you insure for that? Because there was nothing. Well, I suppose there was. The risk for that one is that we're working within the traffic light framework at the moment, so it's unlikely that part of the country was going to move into an orange light. So they were like, well, let's just cut our losses. And also there was a risk to the community as well, I think. So they took they made a decision to move into April or whenever Easter is next year. Yeah. So do you cover for that sort of thing?
Yeah, everything's taken into account. Again, we'll just use that as a really good example because it's kind of live and everyone's kind of aware of that now. So, Rhythm and Vines, to be honest, was always going to be, hit or miss whether it was going to go ahead. And I think a large part of the government stepping up and putting that scheme in place was to protect an event of that scale. You certainly don't want to see a Rhythm and Vines type event, drop off the face of the earth, because it provides such, kind of benefits to such economic kind of benefits to the local community. So an event of that nature, you would always be looking at, does it have the ability to be able to reschedule? And what is the loss in order to do that? So there may be additional costs that, to move it over there. And again, going back to a mountain biking event, how much would it cost you to move it to the following weekend, for example? And we would cover those additional costs. And that just might be extra marketing costs, extra staffing costs. It might be a minimal cost, but an extra 20 grand is quite a large hit. So we'll cover those mitigation costs in order to save the event and make sure it goes ahead. So we'll always look into can the event be rescheduled? When can that event be rescheduled? What additional costs are there? We'll cover those additional costs as well. So it can get quite complex. But as you know, running an event is really, really complex, and there's many things that can go wrong, and there's many different scenarios which could happen. It could be curtailed, it could be postponed, it could be rescheduled, it could be cancelled. Many things could happen, and everything kind of builds into how much it costs. So Rhythm and Vines, for example, let's just put a figure on it. It costs $5 million to run. It would be $5 million multiplied by the rate that we've applied to it. Again, rate would be dictated from the risk. And then that would equal your premium. So often, smaller events are cheaper. Again, but it really depends on what the risk is of that event being cancelled. A rain or shine event which has got no chance of being cancelled due to the rain, really, really good risk, unless it becomes ridiculously dangerous. Again, but those are the things that we weigh up.
So the question that I suppose you don't want me to ask you, but I'm going to ask anyway, is in regards to pandemic-based insurance and SNAP alert level changes, which means that it's actually you're unable to manage an event like and also at the moment, unless your event is 50 people or less, you can't really do an event. And for our team anyway, none of our events are below 500 people.
Yep.
So can we insure based on that, or have you got a risk model of that, or is there not enough of a tail to be able to actually forecast the risk? Or
it's as of March 2020 hit.
Yep.
That was when the World Health Organization effectively declared it a pandemic, and at that stage it became what we refer to as a known event. So insurance is always, you're insuring the unknown, and you're insuring the risk of something happening. But if it's already happening, you're effectively trying to insure a house and it's on fire. And at that stage, all the insurers around the world stopped offering communicable disease cover. And communicable disease is by definition kind of a pathogen that can be passed between animal and animal, or human animal, or animal and animal, and whatever. So as of 2020, no one was insuring communicable disease. And again, as of today, there's still very, very limited and virtually zero availability of commercial insurance to cover a pandemic or a lockdown or anything of that nature. Also, what we found back in March 2020 was last year was a huge year for events. We had we had the Olympics, we had some huge music festivals in the US. We had Wimbledon, for example, which was a huge one in the press, whereby they all had already taken out communicable disease cover. So what we found was there was the largest losses that we'd ever seen in insurance globally. We were talking billions of dollars of losses because these events had taken out insurance already for a scenario of this nature. And what that meant was there was no longer any capacity available in the insurance market out of Lloyd's of London, which is the largest marketplace for insurance. And so you've got no interest in writing it, you've got no availability, and then you've got a lot of businesses who have gone out of business because they've lost all this money from paying out all these claims. So it's been a very, very, very tricky, coming up to almost 2 years now, trying to reintroduce that level of cover. But what we've done here in NZ is been, we've been really lucky, whereby our numbers in comparison with anywhere else in the world are not even on any kind of scale. We're not even in the ballpark of having a pandemic, really, when you look at it in comparison. So we've always been very, very lucky. NZ's probably going to be the first country that'll be able to reintroduce it. It's been really, really good to see that the government has stepped up and offered some level of kind of coverage, albeit very focused on summer festivals and the large scale events. Whether they have to pay out on that, who knows? They've had to pay out on ribbon and vines, which is probably one of their main focuses anyway. But it still leaves probably 95% of the events industry uninsured. And that's what we're really, really, really trying to bring back into the market. We're trying to reintroduce some level of cover, touch wood. We're having daily conversations. We're very, very close to being able to do it. I've said kind of watch this space for the last couple of weeks now, but we are pretty close to be able to bring something back, which hopefully that should be, real comfort for smaller SME type businesses who run events, can't afford to have another snap lockdown or a nationwide, lockdown, which will cause the cancellation. So fingers crossed, we're pretty close to being able to bring it back. But as of today, pretty much nothing available, really.
Because if you think about an event, there's social events, which are like the rhythm and vines or festivals or this, the whatever those type. And there's hundreds of them. There's probably thousands of them over the summertime in New Zealand, and some of them range from small to 80, 100, 20, 150 people. There might be a degustation meal, right up to the big scale ones, which are like the Northern Base up in Whangarei or Bay Dreams or whatever. But there's also the business events. So business events where I'm talking more about conferences And there's a number of associations around New Zealand that rely on these events as a revenue source for the sponsorship, the exhibitors, the delegates, and everything like that. And it hasn't happened for the last, or some of the unlucky associations have been unable to host these events, and they have had a massive loss. So it'll be hugely valuable for the business event sector to have some sort of cover on this as well, because you can't travel in. It just makes it up. Everything is going virtual, which is fine, but and that might be the way that it will be moving forward. And then when this will be another podcast, but when we get into the web 3.0 and in the metaverse, the physical events will be very, very different, because there'll be a combination of two. But in saying that, there's the business events, conferences, conventions, trade shows, those types of things. There's significant birthdays, weddings, or significant occasions like 50th, 40th, 21st, whatever they might be. So there's cover for those. So there's all sorts of different funerals as well, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, so I've been, me and Lisa Hopkins from Business Events, Aotearoa, we've, over the course of probably, say, 18 months, we've probably spoken to each other 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a day. Our real focus has been trying to cover the business event sector, who have just been absolutely decimated by this, because on paper, there's been no support whatsoever. And as you was kind of alluding to there, it's more than just the event. Whether it's a large scale event or a small scale event, it's the ripple effect of that event. Some of these business events, the amount of money that they bring into the local economy through just the fact that taxi drivers rely on an event of that nature. How many hotel rooms are booked out from a large scale conference, an exhibition. It's those types of events that we've really been focusing on, in all honesty, and hopefully, as I said, we should be able to provide some level of assistance for those, because at the moment there's just no support, and they've not been looked after by the government in respect of the scheme. The scheme covers 5,000 people and above type of events, which just doesn't cater for these.
There's no business event in New Zealand that's 5,000 people.
No.
There's
you start looking at the large scale, expos and the food shows and those types of things, and they're kind of in the middle ground. But again, they're still not accounted for in this cover. But again, at the same time, we're focused on you mentioned them weddings. We were the only provider up until March 2020 of wedding insurance in New Zealand. EventCover was another brand of ours, and that was covering your standard wedding insurance, which in New Zealand nobody knows, nobody understood, no one was even aware existed. And unfortunately, that was the product that kind of lost its way somewhat, and we had to put that into hibernation. But the last 6 months, we've been absolutely inundated with people trying to get insurance for their weddings and their funerals and their small kind of public gatherings. I think the focus has changed and the mentality has changed, whereby people are just aware of risk, which from my perspective is a fantastic thing, and you've mentioned it as well there. We're now moving to the virtual event, and that just adds its own risk. What happens if you lose your live stream? What happens if we were able to run the event because of cybercrime and stuff like that? So risk is, we like to say that risk is omnipresent, but we just keep on adding to that. And communicable disease, pandemic, COVID was one. Now we've got the virtual risks, which are now being thrown in there as well. It's just ever changing.
My former job was in the business event space. As an example, based here in Aotearoa, I was working in that space for about 6-7 years. So a domestic delegate brings in about $465 per day to any region where they're traveling to. And Aotearoa alone, over the winter period, which is the off-peak tourism period, was hosting about 120,000 room nights, which is about $50 million economic impact to the city that's pretty much just gone, which makes it even harder for, like you talked about, the ripple effect. There's the venues, but then there's the caterers and all the supply chain that helps the caterers, the people who supply the eggs, the free-range chickens, the ham, the milk, the everything, the baristas that need to be there, the people who deliver the stuff to the courier drivers are doing reasonably well at the moment. There's a massive effect.
Yeah.
So it's not just the event, it's the communities as well, which are struggling. And the tourism sector is another one where obviously we're not having tourists come. Off-peak winter period is when business events is normally really busy, and they quite often use the tourist activities as part of the conference program for some of the cool things that they do outside of the actual inside the venue. Go and do a Zorb, or go and do a mountain bike, or go and skyline, go down the luge, or go on the tree walk, or whatever that might be in Rotorua. And that hasn't happened, which is another. It's a massive, So you can't insure for.
It is, and
you can't insure for that.
And that's what the real sad thing has been. You know, it's all the glamour around the festival and the high scale, you know, artists that have struggled to get into the country and whatever. But aside from that, it's the business event sector and the ripple effect of that, which is absolutely significant for especially a region like you're in. You know, I was there in winter, and it was decimated. It was really sad to see an area which is so thriving from tourism. Pretty sad to see just pretty empty. And you can see it in the people. You know, you can see it in when you're speaking to the baristas in the hotel and the restaurateurs. It's really sad to see. Hopefully, we're kind of coming out of the around the corner on that. Today's announcement, you know, hopefully we should start to moving into the orange, and you know, we should start seeing, you know, hopefully a bit of a change again. But it's entirely reliant on the borders. So, you know, we're not there yet, but hopefully we're in the home straight.
Yeah. So I want to break out of the insurance just for a second, then we'll jump back in. We'll lighten the mood a little bit. So I ask all of our guests this one question: what brand has had the biggest impact on you in your life? So any brand, and why has that brand had an impact on you?
That's a hard one, man. I mean, I've never been all about the brands. I'm not about the name and the logo and stuff like that. I've never really subscribed to that. I mean, the biggest brand. I was thinking about this when you sent me the questions, and the first one that popped into my head was my sports team, which is for me, it's the only brand that I have subscribed to, which is quite interesting. You know, I've never been all about the logos and the Gucci's, and you know, I've never been a Samsung follower or an iPhone follower or anything like that. But I've always stuck true to my brand, which is my football team back home. And
Which team is it?
It's a football team called Oldham Athletic. It's one of the lesser known teams in the kind of Manchester region, and they've gone from being one of, I wouldn't say ever a glamour team. They've always been in the shadow of the Manchester Uniteds and the Manchester Cities and things like that. And they've now fallen from grace, and they're effectively at the bottom of the football ladder. And for them, because I used to work for them before I came to New Zealand. Actually, that was the last job I had in my kind of let's just say my period of making the decision to move to New Zealand was a pretty grey time. You know, I left everything I had and came for a new start in New Zealand. But that's another conversation over a beer, mate. But I used to work for a football team, and I was working in the marketing and the kind of the retail side of it, and it was a very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult for a small sports club who doesn't have any brand presence to create that brand, especially in their local town. And it was like pushing, you know, a good northern phrase, you know, pushing shit up a hill. It was always, you know, our backs to the wall constantly. But you're always relying on that kind of passion, and you're always relying on that, pulling those heartstrings of, you know, people that really follow and embrace that, you know, through thick and thin, through good and bad. We always kind of stick. And that's really the only brand that I've ever subscribed to was my football team. I don't have a tattoo. You know, I'm not the English. I'm not the English hooligan supporter with, you know, my back is the emblem. But yeah, that's really been the brand that I've always subscribed to.
My father-in-law He is a Everton fan, very much so. Blue and blue, everything's Everton. He's bought our kids Everton kit with their own names in them. So I totally understand there in that football sort of space. So let's get back into insurance after that little break. So my next question I want to ask, is, if you could crystal ball gaze, or where do you see insurance moving and going into the next 5 years?
I want to see insurance kind of lose its stigma of around an afterthought. I want insurance to be at the forefront of people's minds, and probably this has changed it a little bit. I don't want it to be the doom and gloom. I don't want it to be we only start talking about it when something bad's happened. I want it to be very inclusive and kind of more understood. I want people to be educated in it a little bit more, especially in the event space where it's still pretty unknown. But I want it to be kind of digitized and automated. Insurance could be automatically included as part of the ticket. So when that ticket is sold, effectively the risk from that, the risk from that revenue is automatically insured. So we're taking effectively AI and understanding the risk, and then we are covering that without going through the rigmarole of the underwriting process and the proposal forms and all the information, which is sometimes very, very tricky to get hold of because you're a busy man and you're running an event and you don't have time to get all that crap. It's just all taken care of. So I'm looking at the next 5 years that we're looking to really start automating the insurance. And I'm also looking at us trying to push the boundaries of what we can insure on a kind of a marketing and increasing that brand. I touched on it very briefly before around the prize insurance. And that's kind of the really interesting type of insurance. What can you insure? You can insure anything. How can sports teams start embracing that kind of, like we see in the US, for example, the high stakes halftime draws and, kicking competitions and that type of stuff. We don't really do it hugely in New Zealand, but we've got the opportunity to do that. We just need to understand it a little bit more and just have more conversations around it as well.
What would be your single most valuable piece of advice you would provide an event organizer who, whether they're experienced or not, are based around insurance? What would the piece of advice be?
Talk to me. Really, just have a conversation. We've found over the last 4 years that it's all about that connection, all about that conversation, and early. Have a conversation early, because anything could happen. Prior to March 2020, we had no idea that this was around the corner. Who would have seen this in their crystal ball? It came out of nowhere. So if there's a risk, then can we insure it? Have that conversation early. It's not always that expensive. If there is some wiggle room in the budget, then make sure that we can insure that. But yeah, have that conversation early in respect of how we can transfer that risk of the event.
Last question: what type of content do you consume personally, like podcasts, social media groups, pages? What are you into at the moment?
I'm on a roller coaster, man. Like I go up and down. I'm like a magpie. If something's shiny, I'll kind of go and listen to it. At the moment, it's more for me, having gone through this pandemic, and it's been pretty hard. I'm not going to lie. Like most people, it's been how we can improve our kind of mental well-being. I think that's a huge one, especially for men who primarily don't always feel comfortable speaking out about it. That's been a real focus, how we can improve that kind of mental well-being and stability, and just allowing people to talk to each other. I think the best thing we can do as blokes is to open up, have a chat, check on each other, make sure people are okay. And that's the type of stuff that I've been consuming of late. Just improving, making sure that I'm in the best possible frame of mind for myself, also for my family as well. We've got 2 young kids, and this is gonna affect us all. So we need to stay strong, and we need to be focused. And yeah, that's the type of content that I'm consuming at the moment, which has been really, really good. Really, really good.
Awesome. So the very last thing you mentioned, that if anyone has got any questions about how to cover their event, contact you. How do we get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a huge one. Stu Hartley, look me up on LinkedIn, the insurance guy. Pretty vocal on there. So, always available to chat. EventCover, www.eventcover.co.nz. And yeah, I'm pretty much around. If you need me, you'll find me. If you can't find me, ask someone and they'll point you in the right direction.
Awesome, Stu. Hey, thanks so much for your time. It's been really, really good. I'll make sure that we have the links to your LinkedIn page, your website, and your email in the show notes. So if anyone has any questions about any sort of event cover, they can contact you directly and you can help them out. But again, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really valuable one, especially for me and for all of our audience too. So yeah, have a great Christmas and an awesome New Year's. And yeah, see you next time.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Appreciate the time. Happy Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. And hopefully 2022 is a better year.